Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another comprehensive yet informal uh, study of the Encyclopedia Sciences. This is the Encyclopedia Logic, and we hope to get to the other ones, but that'll be a long time away. But for now, we're on the Logic, and we're at the very beginning. We're at section 3. Last time, we were talking about um, the nature of thinking a bit more and how we kind of first receive things and then think about them as opposed to the other way around. And he was bringing up God specifically, and because for the most part, he's connecting God and thinking, which he said last time shouldn't be so divorced as it is in his day, and probably in our day as well, if we're analyzing it from that contemporary lens. But he's also saying that they're not exactly the same religious and philosophical thinking, and that when we mix them up a little bit too much, or maybe not even too much, but if we mix them up in the wrong way, like from the top bottom kind of way, where we start metaphysical proofs, it doesn't really make sense. And he gives us argument about digestion and says we kind of receive food and then understand how digestion works after actually experiencing digestion. And then he basically says we should do the same thing with God. Is the kind of implicit argument there. So that was section 2. Now we're moving on to section 3, and again, these aren't really labeled, so we're just gonna have to read it to figure out what it's about. So if nobody else has any preliminary comments, we can begin. But I will also welcome preliminary comments at this time.
Um, yeah, no, I don't have any preliminary comments.
All right. Does anyone want to begin reading? I can start if nobody else wants to. Okay. Whatever kind it may be, the content that fills our consciousness is what makes up the determinacy of our feelings, intuitions, images, and representations, of our purposes, duties, etc., and of our thoughts and concepts. Hence, feeling, intuition, image, etc., are the forms of this content, a content that remains one and the same, whether it be felt, intuited, represented, or willed, and whether it be only felt or felt, intuited, etc., with an admixture of thought, or whether it is thought quite without any admixture. In any one of these forms, or in a mixture of several of them, the content is object of our consciousness. But this objectivity but in this objectivity, the determinacies of these forms join themselves onto the content, with the result that each of these forms seems to give rise to a particular object, and that what is in itself the same can look like a diverse content.
I wish I had read that before starting the phenomenology.
Yeah. This is a pretty I don't know. This gives like Kant vibes in the sense of like it's kind of just going into the preconditions of what like
Well, he talks about the distinction between form and content,
yeah.
which form and content can be and have been contrasted in a bunch of different ways by a different bunch of different philosophers. And in German idealism, they use content in traditional hylomorphism, of course, with Aristotle. It's matter and form, and that's sort of our original distinction.
Hmm.
And this hylomorphism gets taken up by Kant in terms of like matter and form of
Cognition basically.
having, yeah, of cognition. And then the German idealist philosophers run with this into like form and content, but they seem to use it in all sorts of ways that are ambiguous. So having here something like, I don't want to say a full definition, but at least an exposition of the distinction of what form and content is for Hegel. I wish I had that earlier. um,
Yeah. Feeling, intuition, images are the forms. Um,
but basically, he's saying in this case, the content is what fills our consciousness, and the form is the manner in which it fills our consciousness.
okay. Yeah, that's
So,
what I
for
just wanted to
instance,
make sure I had now.
if we had the content God, you could have a feeling of God, an intuition of God,
Hmm.
or a notion of God, or something from the understanding of God, or literally an image of God, like in freaking the Sistine Chapel or something.
Yeah.
And
Could be
in
empirical,
all
could be
those cases,
abstract.
the content, at least the intended content, is the same. But the form is different. Now, I don't know that the actual content is actually the same, but we could say that the content intended or the content meant is the same.
Yeah. By admixture of thought, does he basically just
So,
what does he mean by admixture of thought? That's something I'm a
so
little.
with an admixture of thought,
Does he basically mean like
forms,
a
whether
mixture
it's
of
thought
like this stuff?
or whether it's thought without quite any admixture. I think thought is one of the ways in which the form of content is determined,
Yeah,
right?
right. So like what like the thought like
So
basically.
I think he's just specifying. So hence feeling, intuition, image are forms of content. So feeling with any admixture of thought is a determination of the form of consciousness. Um, Feeling without any admixture of thought is a determination of the form of consciousness. All of these are different determinations of the form of consciousness. That's what he seems to be saying to
Okay.
me.
This objectivity, the determinacy of these forms join themselves onto the right. The result of these forms seem to give rise to a particular. Oh yeah, so this is the kind of particularly Kantian thing that sounded to me. With the result that each of these forms seem to give rise to a particular object, and that what is in itself the same can look like a more diverse content.
Uh,
Or look like
yeah, the determinations of these forms. Yeah, okay, so that's what I was saying earlier, actually. That it doesn't seem like me having a feeling about God and having an image of God, say, right? One in the Sistine Chapel, this image, or just a feeling in your heart or whatever, right? Um, these seem to give rise to a particular object. It looks, at least. So he's saying that it would appear that there is a difference between the two of them, but there isn't a difference between the two of them because he says what it is
can
in
look like
itself,
a diverse
God,
content.
looks like
Okay,
a diverse content.
but it's actually just the same object, the same particular
That's
object.
interesting because that's not what I would think.
Well, no. So I guess like if you just received like an image of God in the Sistine Chapel and a feeling of God, maybe those things are different. But when you like reflect upon it more, maybe you realize it's the same.
In itself, right? Not for us.
Uh, uh,
Yeah, so it's the in
yes,
itself of
yes.
God would be the same.
Which you realize
But
through thinking, but in the immediate for us, then
they appear different and so we might not recognize them.
right.
So for
But in
instance, one
itself, they're
person
the
who
same.
has the
Okay.
feeling of God might not. So for instance, someone who would is very opposed to images, right? Let's say a Muslim, right,
Uh huh.
has a feeling of God and they don't recognize the Sistine Chapel as an image of God.
Mm-hmm.
But Hegel would
In
say
itself, it's the same.
that in itself it's the same.
Right. Okay. Cool. That makes sense. It always helps to break down just those paragraphs. I think not that it's particularly difficult, but just the wording can make it seem a little.
No, this really is more straightforward than the phenomenology.
It is, yeah. It's really nice in that sense, but it still helps to break it down. I think because Hegel is just generally difficult, so that helps me at least. Any other questions or comments about that before the indentation? Does anyone want to read the indentation?
Sure.
Cool. Take it away, Harrison.
Since the determinacies of feeling, of intuition, of desire, of willing, etc., are generally called representations, inasmuch as we have knowledge of them, it can be said in general that philosophy puts thoughts and categories, but more precisely concepts, in the place of representations. Representations in general, or notions, can be regarded as metaphors of thoughts and concepts. But we have these notions, but that we have these notions does not mean that we are aware of their significance of for thinking, i.e., that we have the thoughts and concepts of them. Conversely, it is one thing to have thoughts and concepts, and another to know what the representations, intuitions, and feelings are that correspond to them. One side of what is called the unintelligibility of philosophy is related to this. The difficulty lies partly in the inability, which in itself is just a lack of practice, to think abstractly, i.e., to hold on to pure thoughts and to move about in them. In our ordinary consciousness, thoughts are affected by and united with the sensible and spiritual material with which we are familiar. And in thinking about something, in reflecting and arguing about it, we mix feelings, intuitions, and representations with thoughts. Categories like being or singularity are already mingled into every proposition, even when it has a completely sensible content. This leaf is green, but it is a very different thing to make the thoughts themselves unmixed with anything else into objects. The other aspect of the unintelligibility of philosophy is an impatient wish to have before us, in the mode of representation, what is in our consciousness as thought and concept. There is a saying that when we have grasped a concept, we still do not know what to think with it, but there is nothing to be thought with the concept save the concept itself. What this saying means, however, is that we long for an ordinary notion, one that we are already familiar with. Consciousness feels as if, together with the mode of representation, the very ground where it stands solidly and is at home has been pulled from under it, finding itself displaced into the pure realm of the concept. It does not know where in the world it is. Hence, the writers, preachers, orators, etc., who tell their readers or listeners things that they already knew by heart, things that are familiar to them, and even self explanatory, are the ones that are most readily understood.
Hmm.
This was
Yeah.
genuinely very helpful for me to hear that.
Cool. Do you want to like go into that?
I don't know. I think this partly um goes into the discussion that was engaged with pre video in regards to the I guess in regards to thinking about the sensation or experience um of a difference between the I guess like kind of like really clarifying specifically that not all, well, even that not all thought is philosophy was the first thing.
Mm.
And also just that kind of going to the specificities of this kind of desire for things to be understood in ordinary consciousness. Um, I think definitely some of the difficulties that that I was facing in the discussion prior to this video are reflected in many of the things stated in this section.
Yeah, I was kind of anticipating that actually, because it is talking about um, how the consciousness, a conscious subject, um, is sort of turned about, put on its head, disoriented by philosophical thinking, and sort of searches for the familiar in it, and the familiar just can't. It's looking for what it already has, when what it's been given is something new.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is almost. This is weird. I almost, and I know like it's weird because it's like Hegel, but I almost wish this kind of intro, like this was given to me as an introduction to philosophy itself.
Yeah, I
I actually
agree.
think that there are similar things that have been said by other philosophers in clearer ways. um, like I think you can get a similar exposition in Russell's History of Philosophy, for example. I
Okay.
also There also is such an exposition in Plato, in the allegory of the cave,
I see.
as a
Yeah.
matter of fact, because the allegory of the cave is metaphysical on the one hand, but it also is conceptual. Because
Yeah.
even if we deny, for instance, that forms exist as actual beings,
Mm.
as philosophers, we still have to deal with pure abstractions.
Yeah. And universals. Yeah.
Right. And so, in dealing with these pure abstractions and universals and thinking in such an abstract way, we are confronted with a mode of consciousness, or what Plato calls seeing, that is not what our eyes, quote unquote, are accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say that this is actually present in a number of different philosophical works. So, yes, you can get it from Hegel. There are probably other places you can get it that are a little easier in my mind.
Sure. But that's only the one aspect of unintelligibility from my reading of this, which we're talking about this bottom one. Like, this top one seems to be the other problem, or are they related? Because what is this top one saying? This top one is saying that it's the inability, which Hegel thinks is actually in itself just a lack of practice, to hold on to pure thoughts and to move about in them. Ordinary conscious thoughts are affected and united by sensible and spiritual material we are familiar. So like abstracting away might be difficult, which I guess is actually, to be honest, really not that different from what you were saying.
Yeah, that's, I think, what I was saying.
And then this other one is just talking about the impatience and unfamiliarity. Okay, so I guess honestly, I don't know why he's like separating these into two separate things. They're actually really similar. Well, I guess literally they're not the same at the like inability, lack of practice, and impatience are two different things. But to be honest, I think they're highly related. Which actually, to be honest, is probably why he shoved it all in one paragraph, which makes sense. So, okay, yeah, cool. So that was section three. A lot of it has to do with well, we were just talking about familiarity of concepts and notions, representations, and some difficulties consciousness might run into in dealing with them. Um, that's kind of what it's doing. In the beginning, we were also talking about form and content, which is just very helpful. So, yeah, I think we covered everything for this section three. This is
Yeah.
only 17 minutes, but I think we covered a lot. So, I don't know. Do you guys think we should go into section four or end it here?
I think we could go into section 4, but in another video, let's just keep it, steady.
Okay, sure. All right. Well, we'll see you in section four then. Uh, make sure to leave the cave, and do some conceptual. Don't be out of practice in a Hegelian sense. That's my lesson for this. That's my Hegelian advice at the end of the
Practice
study.
makes perfect.
Yeah, make sure you practice your conceptual play in a meaningful matter, not just empty conceptual play, like Kant would say or something. All right, cool. Yeah, we'll see you for section four. Whoop, yeah.